John Henry Newman once said, 10,000 difficulties do not add up to one doubt. 10,000 difficulties are not the same thing as even one doubt. Now, that's a remarkable thing for him to say. And what he was saying to us is that difficulties about our faith that, are from here up, I have this question about that, and I don't understand how this works, and I don't understand that. And so the resurrection of Jesus Christ, well, I don't understand. What about this, and what about that, and what about that? Those are difficulties from the neck up. But what he was trying to say by that wonderful saying of his is that doesn't add up to one doubt about how I live my life. That's an intellectual thing. But how am I going to live my life? How am I going to put my life on the line? How am I going to put my precious and wild life on the line? Where am I going to take the big chips of life, and where am I going to lay them down? This is where my love and my life will take a stand on in the world. It will be on the fact that Jesus is alive. And I can have all the intellectual questions about how does that work in the resurrection? That doesn't add up to one single doubt about how we live our lives. We live our lives at the place of where am I going to follow my love in life? What's the personal truth and reality for me that I build my life on? How am I going to love in the world? What love will I follow so that I know my life is going in the right direction? That's not a matter of me having little questions about this and that. That's a matter of where is my heart? And it is, you can have all the questions in the world. You can have 10,000 questions, and you can talk about it all day long. But none of that settles what you're going to do when you step out the door and you're going to live your life. How deep is going to be the well that you plug into to draw the energy for your life and your love. It won't be up here with the difficulties about this and that doctrine. It will be about none of that comes up, none of that makes a doubt about how to live in love, about how we're going to love and put our lives on the line. That's something much, much deeper that comes from how we look at the world with the eyes of love. Because we know that a person who is in love sees the world in a different way than a person who is not in love. We know that a person who is not in love makes certain judgments about what is real and good in the world and what is true. But a person who is in love, they make a different kind of judgment about what is really real, what is really true, what is really worth living your life for. And faith is to be in love with God. It is to see the world with the eyes of people who are in love with God. And for someone who is in love with God, 10,000 difficulties do not make one doubt about how I'm going to live in love, because Jesus is alive. In our gospel, Jesus seems to be saying the same sort of thing. That same sort of dynamic seems to be happening with Thomas. Because Thomas has all of his intellectual difficulties. But when Jesus says, come over here, come into my wounds, what Jesus does is invite him into his woundedness. He invites him into his wounds. And Peter's response is, my Lord and my God. Yeah, that's where I live from. I can have my doubts, but that's not where my heart lives from. And so we live in a culture that has 10,000 difficulties about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. They could ask a million questions. But Jesus invites us into his wounds. Because that's when we begin to understand something about the resurrection. What is one of the things that is so amazing about the resurrected Christ is he's a person who's wounded, whose wounds are healed. That's resurrection. He's walking around the earth. The resurrected Christ is walking around the earth in our gospel. And he is a man who is wounded. And he still has the wounds. But the wounds are healed. And that's the beginning of understanding something about the resurrection. That means that the resurrection is not about rescuing us from wounds. God didn't rescue Jesus from the wounds of living in this life, of being a human person, and we all know that being a human person means a regular involvement in a certain level of suffering that's just about being human in this life. And here's a man in Jesus who also lived for a set of values that were going to get him killed. And one of those values was that when he get pushed into a corner and evil, and he couldn't stop the evil without being evil himself, his value was to suffer the evil and to overcome the evil with love and forgiveness and goodness. And so it's when we touch the wounds of Jesus that we begin to understand what this redemption is about. It's not about rescuing us, and it's not about fixing our wounds so they never happened, because that's not where Jesus is. Jesus still has his wounds. It's about our wounds being healed. It's not about God fixing them like it never happened. It's not about rescuing us from them ever happening. It is about healing the wounds that we have. And so the resurrection is about redemption. And redemption is that big religious word that means transformation. The transformation of a crucifixion into a resurrection. It's about woundedness being healed. It's about reversing the damage that was done. It's about taking evil and transforming it into good. It's about taking the opportunities of evil and meeting them with love and forgiveness and overwhelming acts of goodness and goodness and goodness until the evil is transformed. It's about changing evil into good. And so it's when we touch the wounds of Christ, it's when we get to the woundedness that he invites us into that we start to understand the mystery of the resurrection. The mystery of it is, a part of the mystery of it is that there's only one Redeemer. Jesus alone is the Redeemer. And yet, he doesn't redeem all alone. We are part of the work of redemption. It is his Spirit that he gives to he comes back, and what does he do? Immediately, he gives his Spirit to his disciples. And it's that Spirit within us that makes us part of his redemptive work. It's that Spirit that gives his love, his forgiveness, that puts his energy into our faith and our hope and our love so that they can be lifted to a higher power, so that we can meet the evil and the woundedness, and we can overcome it with love. And there can be a transformation in which Christ redeems the evil, reverses the effects of its decline, and turns it in the direction of good. The transformation of our crucifixions into resurrections. Common sense would probably tell us that if we could have just been there and seen Jesus in the flesh, it would be so much easier to have faith. And yet, our gospel tells us exactly the opposite. Thomas is there, he's seen it all in the flesh, and still, he's living at the level of his 1,000, 10,000 difficulties. It doesn't help him automatically reach the level of seeing the Lord. And that's a wonderful saying that gets repeated twice in that reading. We have seen the Lord. And of course, haven't we? Haven't we seen the Lord? It doesn't mean seeing Jesus in the flesh for our Christian ancestors. That's not what it meant. It means we have seen the Lord. We have seen that Jesus is alive. And he is alive in our hearts. He's alive in our community. He's alive in history. Redeeming transforming, healing, reversing damage. We have seen the Lord. And I love there's this incredibly wonderful little saying in there, because the first time that Jesus meets with the disciples, Thomas is not there. And then when Thomas is there, it says that Jesus comes back and they were all inside. That's us. We're all inside right now. We're inside the community of faith that gathers. I love that saying. They were inside. This is what it means to be inside. We're inside life. We're inside love. We're inside faith in the crucified Jesus Christ who is alive. We're on the inside now. And what the gospel is telling us is that the way to see the Lord is not about flesh and blood. It's about being on the inside with the community of Christ. And it's here is one of those privileged places that we see the Lord. We get it. That's what I'll put my life. That's what I'll bet the big chips of my life about. That's where they'll put them down. That's where I'll put them down. That's where my love is leading me. We're inside here. What in the world is Jesus doing taking care of his disciples? He's just been crucified, tortured, crucified, shamed, betrayed. What's he doing back taking care of his disciples? It's one of the most incredible things on this mercy, on this Sunday that is about mercy. The first thing on Jesus' mind when he is raised from the dead is, I got to help my disciples. He's there trying to heal their woundedness. He's ministering to them. You would think they'd be ministering to him. He's there to minister to them. The thing on his mind is, how can I heal and take care of my disciples? That's the only. He's back in appearance after appearance after appearance, and it's not there to ask them to care for him. It's for him to care for them. It's the only thing in his heart is, how do I help my disciples now? How will I heal them? How will I reverse the damage in their hearts? How will I turn their own crucifixions into resurrections? The resurrected Christ is about accompanying us in his mercy and forgiveness and love and redeeming our own woundedness. And so let's come on this Divine Mercy Sunday to the altar, knowing that the resurrected Christ is once more in the midst of us, in the inside here with us, to minister to us. He is going to feed us with real food that is his own divine life, because we're what's on his mind. He's more worried about us than we are. He loves us more than we do. He's more concerned about our lives than we are. He's trying 24/7. He's working 24/7 in us to reverse the damage and to heal the wounds.